This is gonna fling something. Well, we got a bunch of stuff installed on this, and I gotta show you some of the updates here. Wow. I'm just surprisingly happy with how this came out. I kind of had my doubts that this thing was going to survive this sort of powertrain change because I really didn't know how to do the suspension and stuff. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the suspension changes and the drivetrain updates and stuff. So here's all the goods. Basically, from the suspension side, what I decided to do here was actually just stack huge amounts of leaf springs on there. I took regular Tamiya leaf springs and then I snipped off the end, so that what I ended up with was basically a full-length leaf spring, and the spring just has the eye cut off, and so they're almost full length. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. There's 4 on the back on each side. And so the long leaf, the full leaf, is actually the one that's on the top. And then there's basically 3 full-size or almost full-size helper leaves underneath that. And then the other trick that Rob was talking to me about, which was a really good idea, is I drilled all the way through the leaf hanger here. I drilled it completely through, and then put a nut on top of the leaf spring, so that at least there's not just the screws, just only screws holding into there. There's actually like a bolt that goes all the way through the housing to clamp the leaf on, if you will. There's no U-bolts, right? So they're either just screwed in from the top, or in this case, there's a bolt all the way through, and that is really strong. So that's fantastic. And then in the front, I already had the red leaves on it in the front, and of course that's the soft version. So on the front, I didn't mind it being a little bit softer suspension, but what I did was stack leaf springs under it again. So same kind of story. Some of these were actually Tamiya helper leaves from, I forget what the part number bag is. And then the other ones are just Tamiya full-length leaves that I cut off. I can see it's already pushing pretty hard on this red leaf, so I bet you I'll have to change the red leaf to the black Tamiya again. The red ones are probably just too soft. So I've got 4 leaves in the front total. And then I've got 4 leaves in the back total. And man, the suspension on this thing is hard. Okay, it is, I mean, really, really hard. It works, but boy, is it ever stiff. So that should be good news. I wanted just enough suspension travel so that it would kind of absorb a little bit of the bouncing shock when you're flying across the dunes or whatever it is. So let's talk about where the electronics went. It turned out really well, actually. It's a lot simpler than I thought it was going to be. So this is, of course, the Castle. It's the 1406, so it's the 540 size can. And then this is a 4600 kV. They say 3-cell LiPo max. I'm going to go more than that. And I'm not expecting a warranty on this, so, you know, I'm okay with sending it a little bit extra. I'm not going to be calling Castle and saying, oh, your 1406 failed, you know what I mean? Because this is an experiment. I'm willing to take the risk on it. We talked about, in the last video, putting the motor wires kind of off to the side and getting them down here so that it would be opposite the drive shaft. And it turned out that was like the most epic fail idea ever, because I put the ESC on this side right here. So I know, right? So this is on a magnet. I can actually pop that off so you can see in there. So what I did is I ran the motor wires just over the frame rail here, and then kind of curled them around the post here with some zip ties. The post just has a magnet on it. The only purpose of this post is to hold up the interior floor. And then I put the Mamba Max Pro here. It's shoe glued right onto the nylon slider so that it really won't come out ever. I think that's a one-stop deal. And then the fan was sitting kind of like right on the bottom of the floor here, and I wanted to make sure the fan could get some airflow because I expect it'll probably get used in this truck. So I just square notched out a hole, and that also gave me the chance to get the battery wire out. I wanted to get the battery wire out over top because as you can see with the ESC down in here and the floor having a big bracket on it for the dude's seat on the other side, there was no bottom battery mount space that I thought was suitable. This is a really nice spot to protect the speed control and stuff from dirt flying into it or any of the other issues that could happen. And with the inner fenders in the front, and then the rear having the box mount like right here, I don't think there's going to be much debris getting in, so that's the good news. The bed floor comes right to here on the truck. So anything that's going on in the back in the tire area probably is not going to get into the interior hole. So this should be well protected from sand and everything else getting in the fan. And then the inner fenders ought to do that just fine in the front. This is the inner fenders that I was using, and they were kind of sitting in here sort of like this. So for the most part, it's mostly covered. What I might end up doing is actually just gluing a little piece of black styrene in here to try to keep the sand out from getting into this side slider plate, but we'll see. There's where the ESC wires come out. What I ended up doing here was changing the transmitter and receiver to a simple axial style, you know, the regular 2-channel kind of basic radio, because when I use my crawling trucks, I have no spring in my steering wheel, and that means that the wheels actually stay wherever you put them. They don't return to center. There's no spring in the steering and the transmitter. So I love that for scale driving, but that is a colossal disaster when you're trying to go fast. When you want to let go of the wheel and have it center, it needs to be, you know, centered. So for speed, I think I needed to change that. And instead of trying to put the spring back into my FlySky transmitter, which I use for tons of other trucks, I just switched out the radio system for this basic axial. This is an AR3 receiver, and it's the old style axial transmitter that I'm using. So you remember these. This thing is old school, and it works good, but it's old school, and that's all I need. It literally is. I mean, I need gas, I need steering, I'm done. And this has a steering dual rate, which is really handy because I've turned the steering way down on it so that it doesn't end up having full lock. I didn't want to have very much steering throw, which is all you need to do with that axial transmitter. So I changed the steering links here a bit, and I had to change the steering knuckles, and I'll show you why here. So this truck is so old, I actually still had Ascender steering knuckles on it. I mean really old. So this truck setup, I think, was one of the first CMAX trucks that I actually did. I think it was the second or maybe third. So the Ascender has a really high steering knuckle on it, and the high steer knuckle was actually rubbing the rod end on the tire right here. So because it was like a full like 5 millimeters taller than this setup right here. So this thing here was considerably higher, and then it was rubbing on the tire, and even at just turning it like this, there was actually rubbing on the tire just a tiny bit. But I figured, you know what, that's going to wear through at speed, so in a really bad way. So I changed the knuckles over to the Bauhaus RC knuckle, which GCM uses on all their axle housings and axle hardware kits. So I changed that, and then what I did is I bent the steering link to go underneath the leaf springs. That was a really simple idea. And then I've got all the clearance I need for the steering, and no problem. The push rod goes on top of the leaf, the rest of it's underneath the leaf, and that ought to be plenty strong enough for this job. And no motor cover yet. There was a lot of comments in the YouTube comments and stuff from the other two videos, specifically the second one, that especially Randy made a comment, you know, leave this off, leave the motor cover off so you can measure the temperatures of the motor. And I never thought of that, but that's a really good idea. I haven't built an actual fast truck for such a long time that I forgot that was going to be important. None of our crawl trucks have any motor temperature issues ever, so I basically just stopped thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, in this case, it's a real problem. So I'll have to be checking that, and I think it's going to be great with the Blazer hood to just, you know, rip open the hood, check the motor temps. Yeah, it's good. Keep driving, and away we go. So that should be exciting. I did have to re-glue a lot of this stuff in here when I kind of reattached the whole thing. There was a couple of screws here that go up through the bottom into this printed tube work here, and they had pulled out and gotten bashed around for so many years now. So I shoe glued these all on here with some nice big gussets, and that'll keep the interior stuff from flying out while I'm bouncing around down the trail or whatever it is, the dunes. You can kind of get a glimpse of this now, but the battery tray is going to end up going on top of the deck, on top of the bed. So I have a couple of really simple ideas for that. What I really want to do is just put a plate of styrene here that's maybe removable or something with a battery strap. And I want to keep the battery weight central, so it's not off to one side. Try to keep the truck balanced left and right. And I also want the weight a little bit farther back. So I'm not going to use huge batteries or anything, but I did want to keep the battery weight behind center. So there's some reasons for that. If you look at the way a two-wheel drive buggy is built, they have the battery central, and then the motor and transmission is all in the back, and it's rear-wheel drive, two-wheel drive buggies. And so the front end is really light. And anytime you're going fast, that's a great way to set up the vehicle, because it keeps the front end kind of light on its feet, if you will, when you're driving. And so all of your major impacts and traction is going to happen in the back. And of course, in a two-wheel drive buggy, the front wheels don't need to be on the ground for traction. And in my case, I want to keep most of the weight on the back axle so I have a little bit more control over how it's getting traction. If it's light in the back end, it's going to be really hard to drive, basically. So I don't want it to be heavy in the front and be constantly smashing into stuff in the front end. I want the front end to kind of be a little bit lighter biased, if you will, so that when I'm dunes running and whatever, hitting bumps and stuff, it's already sort of preloaded light in the front. So hopefully the balance will work out that way. I'm not really sure yet. You can already tell from the cage on the Blazer that it's already got lots of metal work in the back end already. So the body itself is already kind of rearward weight biased. And hopefully it'll be fine like that. If I don't have enough weight in the back, I can actually add the spare tire back onto the back cage work on the Blazer, because in that body I've done the mount for the spare tire built right into the cage work, so I can literally just bolt the tire back on and get an extra few grams in the back, and that should help out. So that's the changes I've made so far. The next thing we're going to do is actually take this thing for a test run. I'm going to drop the body back on and then see if I can't figure out the battery tray stuff, and hopefully get some kind of a measurement of weight, find out where the center of the weight is actually lined up, and then we're going to go find some dirt and see if we can't tear it up a little bit. You can see the tires are already dirty, and I'm making a mess of the bench here, but and they are in fact a little bit dirty. what I did is I just plugged a battery in here and strapped it on and took it out into the backyard, into the sand pit, just to kind of see if it was actually running properly. And it's running really good, so I have hopes for this to actually turn out really well. There's essentially no rolling resistance on this truck at all, with the exception of the knobs on the tires. It's extremely smooth rolling, and so I have a feeling the drivetrain is pretty efficient. I guess we'll find out. Stay tuned for the next one. I'm going to spend some time trying to figure out the weight balance and the battery mounting, and get the body mounted again, put the inner fenders back in, and then we'll do a little experiment and see if I can actually get it to drive half decent in some dirt. So look forward to that on the next video, and thanks for watching. If this is cool to you, then feel free to subscribe and like the video, and we'll see you on the next one.